Art Harman is the director of the Coalition to Save Man's Space Exploration.
And welcome, thanks for attending, and we'll have some time for questions at the end. How to create and maintain freedom in space colonies. This may seem an esoteric subject today, but 50 years from now, if we're not looking at this now and creating kind of the framework and philosophical arguments for it, then we may find space is much more of a dystopian movie than what we imagine it could be. First off, why do people want to colonize Mars? Just to study red rocks with a microscope? I don't think so, and you may not either. Let me ask you all, why would you want to go to Mars? Please tell me. New frontier, I like that. Anyone else? Why would you go to Mars or the moon or just up into orbit?
Great restaurants.
Very good, and we'll need people who will bring those there. We can't have just all Starbucks or just all food from a toothpaste tube. Anyone else? Why would you go to Mars? Why would you go to live on another world? Good, very good. Build a civilization. I like that too. Anyone else?
Get away from politics.
There you go. Anyone else? What's that? Exploring lava tubes, absolutely. Yeah, the amount of discovery of the new worlds will be very exciting.
Grow new and exciting types of food.
Oh yes, and I'm sure.
There won't be a lot of meat up there for a long time.
There'll be potatoes flavored with Mars soil, which might be very interesting.
I don't talk about what the minorities.
Yeah, there you go. Some of the themes that you all mentioned is what the human spirit's all about. It's about exploration, opportunity, entrepreneurship, the unknown, adventure, and expanding humanity across space. And that's been true throughout human history. And this is what makes people give up safe and even prosperous lives to seek out the unknown. And, but it doesn't always work out that way, but people will risk death. They'll risk death in Journey to the New World. How many people died, throughout all of history trying to find the next great place? What's over that mountain? What's over that hill? They would risk death exploring a new frontier in America. Go west, young man. And many of them probably died along the way of all sorts of things. But everyone who lives in California or particularly grew up and has family, well, they all came west in that wagon train. Exploring Mount Everest. That was very risky. No one had ever done it before successfully, and still to this day, people die climbing to Mount Everest because it's there, so said one of the non-successful explorers. To escape dictatorships and experience freedom for the first time. There were many, many people who lost their lives trying to escape from places like the Soviet Union, Nazi Germany, and countless other regimes over the millennia. I was there when the Berlin Wall opened, and I got to meet people. They're taking their first ginger steps into the unknown, where they can express themselves, where they can talk freely, where for the first time in their life, there's not a guy aiming a gun at their head if they say the wrong thing, do the wrong thing, or say something nasty about the leader. And so this, for me, was a very special moment. But it's going to kind of be like that. You see the people there celebrating on top of the wall? It's going to kind of be that way for the first people on Mars. Wow, we're here. So, you know, and of course, Apollo was not without risk. Thankfully, we had no deaths during Apollo. Apollo 13 could have turned out very differently, and but for Neil Armstrong taking over the controls of the lander, it could have turned out terribly, because it was going to come down over rocks, as you may remember, and so he piloted it to a safe place where it would land safely. So to get to Mars and to have the new frontiers we hope for, you know, so there's no shortage of people who want to go to the moon. In fact, we have somebody in the audience here who's signed up for Mars 1, and yet people will sign up for things like this knowing they're basically going to spend the rest of their life in a sardine can underground and not be able to go outside like all of us can do. Just, you know, you go outside with a cup of coffee in the morning, and you have that ability that we just simply won't have for a very long time, to just that effortlessly walk around on Mars without somebody saying, you're going to damage one of 100 spacesuits we have, so you'd better be careful with it. Elon Musk will be able to fill his BFRs to Mars easily as well. And so that gets back to what you all expressed, the wide open frontier and the liberating and creative effects that gives us. In exploring, and you know, one of the reasons you all expressed too is that new, you know, freedom to start again. French Foreign Legion was full of all sorts of rogues and thieves and so forth. Why? Because they could start their life again, convicts and whatever. You just come to you know, Foreign Legion. They don't care. You can do whatever you want and have that ability. And so we'll see that on Mars. But what's going to keep us free on Mars? Past open frontiers are excellent models to study for colonies on Mars. I'll get to that in a moment. Our Constitution is the model to study to create and maintain any free government in space, whether it's a large monster colony we'll see in movies and hope we'll have in 100, 200 years, or whether it's, you know, a couple hundred people that are, you know, clustered together in a bunch of modules as the first group of people on Mars. The problem is that future colonists may not necessarily live in peace and freedom, because all the ills of Earth are likely to follow us. Same, you know, the government and governments have a terrible record of crushing that spirit. Hence, there's people dancing on the Berlin Wall. So what rights would and responsibilities would colonists have? How would courts and disputes for crimes work? If rights aren't specified and defended, they'll fade away or be taken away. Ben Franklin remarked, "We have a republic if you can keep it." And that's a warning through the ages that creating and maintaining a free society won't be any easier than on Earth, nor in any way automatic. Liberty has always been an endangered species on Earth. There's more people living in tyranny, even in the days of internet and everything, than live under free governments. And this was a challenge for our founding fathers. It's sort of like they did the research and the paper. But they researched the successes and failures of free governments throughout history. And then they created that, from that, a structure to survive the ages of those who wish to take away those freedoms. And the result? Oh, just try saying, you can't say that. And you'll probably have 100 people rushing up to that person and saying, it's my right. It's my First Amendment right to say that. So we have essentially a self-perpetuating free society because we know our rights. We have the Constitution. We know freedom of speech, freedom of religion, everything else, freedom of association. They're essentially unalterable. It's really tough to amend the Constitution for good reasons. And we can help defend those rights ourselves. We can get together and take court cases to the Supreme Court. We can speak out and so forth. But it's not like that in most countries where rights are offered to you like candy to a kid. And they can be stolen back on a whim. They're not something you inherently have like we see freedom here. The old Soviet Constitution, I used to have a copy of it on my desk because I'm in the political world, and I annotated it because about every right that was written in the Soviet Constitution had a little disclaimer, except for reasons of national security. So because of that, in effect, they had no rights, and the guy with the gun was the guy that told them no. So that only the elite had rights. So we want to avoid that future. Freedoms and responsibilities must coincide in a new way in space, however. Colonists, perhaps for centuries, will have serious responsibilities to keep the colony operational. If nobody wants to grow potatoes or run the moisture farm, then that puts an impossible burden on the colony. An Earth city can get away with being a basket case and let the roads disintegrate. You know, go down roads of Washington, D.C., where I'm from, and perhaps it's as bad here, the potholes and stuff. But if nobody fixes the airlock because it's somebody else's thing, or then it has alarming consequences. So those responsibilities in a colony-type situation must be clearly defined and enforced, but without threatening human rights. Now, this isn't the only model. A Chinese-run colony would have no more freedom there than at home, and may be as hostile to other colonies as China is in the South China Sea, where they're saying, oh, it and your lands and international waters are ours. The concept of a complete Mars government may never exist, just like there's no Earth government. There's the UN, there's the EU, there's regional associations of nations, but that may or may not ever exist even 100 years from now, simply because there's different cultures, different purposes in people's lives, different reasons to have a colony and live on Mars, and people would probably gravitate to those as they wish. Probably early colonies, early bases, really, say research bases that are, you know, have some commercial parts to them and so forth, and tourist parts, and maybe a retirement community that those can afford it, buy berths in and so forth. But as it expands in size, then, you know, there will be that need for governments of some sort. And you know, and how will that happen? Well, some may decide to associate with national governments. Newt Gingrich said, well, if 50,000 people on the moon decide to become an American state, then they can live under our constitutional protections. That may not be the model for all. China will have theirs, and if you try to escape from it, you might have problems. So let's go a little bit about what is a colony. A colony would be, in space, perhaps best looked at like the early American colonies, where you have a small group of people that get somewhere. They sometimes, in the early days, they would sign a long contract, you know, become an indentured servant in exchange for coming over there. There would be rights and responsibilities, look up the Mayflower Compact and things like that. So they were often commercially or governmentally sponsored. But none of those may be what you would, none of the things people talk about in our space community might match how that turned out and how, and so forth. Bases run by national space programs would be organized and run by those governments. Look to ISS, Mir, Skylab, and Andy Weir's The Martian for examples. Of how those were run. Basically, you work for NASA on ISS, you follow their rules. There's a couple of astronauts that did not follow the rules on Skylab, and they got kind of shut off because they kind of went rogue for a day or so, and none of them ever flew again for NASA. And the Canadian astronaut, well, help me with his name, who did the video in space. Yes. I had a chance to meet him, great guy, but NASA wouldn't allow that because people would think, oh, that's going to make people think we're treating space in a trivial way. Canada had a little better idea. National Geographic's Mars series depicts a combined international government and corporate type colony that then expands and starts to have its own problems. If you haven't seen it, check it out. It's worthy of a look. Commercial bases, by logic, say you work for SpaceX and you're going with them to follow some model similar to ISS, or if you work at the Amazon complex on Mars, then you'll be an Amazon of Amazon or SpaceX and have your rights, besides your free time, pretty much dictated by them. Tourist bases, or those components that would be attached to them, would be more, maybe a bit more free, but kind of like going to the Antarctic. They're going to say, don't you dare stray away from here. We're not going to take responsibility for you. So you'll have a big, long contract. But as a colony expands and you get a governing structure, then there'll be probably a variety of different ones, but hopefully the free ones, those running the colonies will, like our founding fathers, have understood the lessons of history. Doesn't matter if you've read them, if you really understood them. First thing, what is law? Well, Frederick Bastiat says that it is the collective organization of the individual right to lawful defense. Each of us has a natural right from God to defend his person, his liberty, and his property. And these are the three basic requirements of life, and preservation of any one of them is dependent upon the other two. An individual cannot lawfully use force against the person, liberty, or property of another individual. So law is not kangaroo courts and firing squads, nor is it anarchy and mob justice and violence. Liberty dies either way. You'll need courts, lawyers, and prisons. You know, somebody's actually going to have to build a prison on Mars. It's sad, but human nature is such that there will be somebody that becomes a criminal or is a criminal. And so forth. Contract disputes, even if totally innocent, how do you handle those? You got to have some sort of courts with some sort of authority. Property rights, can you make and buy and sell and own the things that are yours? Can you build a factory on Mars and it be yours? The Outer Space Treaty might differ on that, but that is exitable if necessary. Defense might seem old-fashioned, but there will always be evil people and nations, and hackers could cripple a colony. Wars between colonies can't be ruled out, and if you don't plan for it, and say, we're going to defend our colony, then the worst will happen because you've left yourself vulnerable to it. Space is huge, and Mars and Moon are nearly limitless. Isn't there room for everyone? Tell that to the citizens in the countries like in the South China Sea, or people who suffered all the millennia of tyranny and conquest on Earth. Hitler in Europe, Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union. So laying down a foundation of freedom at the beginning, before you ever take off, and and having mechanisms to enforce those freedoms and get people to enforce them is essential. So we can create the societies we want, but if we're not ready, then we get a dystopian, the dystopian society that we see in movies. Happy to take a few questions. Sure.
Just, your discussion of responsibilities, I think, is an interesting one. Have you looked at the model of, in Britain, roads and bridges and stuff were often the responsibility of the adjoining landholders, and there were boards that enforced the maintenance of those sort of public utilities?
A good thing to look up, and to perhaps that could be a model in some instances. Others?
Obviously, stuff like the American Constitution was a great document which espoused a lot of great ideas about, all men being equal and stuff. But obviously, at the time, all men weren't equal. People still owned slaves and stuff. What lessons can we learn from the past about liberty applying to everyone without any kind of bias?
Well, the U.S. Constitution, in a way, was the cure for that, because it is amendable, and so that was something even the founding fathers, slavery was something that even the founding fathers did not like and wrote about, and eventually it was eliminated and the Constitution altered to fit that. So that's where you want to get into, protecting rights and making sure you do include from the very start everyone. Yeah, good question.
Yeah, I was interested by the fact that you only mentioned the American Constitution. I live in Western Europe. We have a lot of democracies, and every country has a constitution except for Britain. And there are some. There are different varieties of democracy. So have you thought anything about that?
Well,
is there anything to learn, for instance, from? Well, I come from Scandinavia. In Scandinavia, we have something called parliamentarism, which means that the leader, the president or the prime minister, needs to have the support of the parliament. So, for instance, if he commits crimes or is suspected of committing crimes, you don't need to go through a lengthy process of impeachment. You can actually depose the leader very fast. And this
well,
this was invented 100 years after the American Constitution. And in Norway, in Scandinavia, we see this as a great improvement on that sort of leadership. So, but that's beside the point. My main point was, have you been inspired by other democracies? Because you were only talking about Russia and China, and they're obviously not democracies.
Oh, well, I was using them as examples of what we want to avoid, but certainly there's a lot of things from Europe and other places that can be incorporated. I use the U.S. Constitution because I'm most familiar with it, but we're all on the same team there. Yeah.
A good source, though, as you say, it's a bit older. For people who are interested in comparative governments and that sort of thing, is John Adams, the second president of the United States, wrote an extensive 3-volume work on past democratic governments and how they fared and so forth. The defense of the constitutions of the United States.
Mm-hmm.
But it is an
Sure.
interesting point you raised, because one of the things you were talking about responsibilities, and of course one thing that distinguishes European democracies largely from the American one is that the government has a lot more responsibilities. For instance, I live in a country where healthcare is seen as a right and it's free for everyone. It's
Yeah.
not here. So, and that's an important distinction.
Well, I totally understand what you're saying. We're running out of time, but there's we need a core structures of what will be the rights and responsibilities and freedoms of citizens. And so my hope is that by talking about this, we'll start to think about these things and the other side, which is, and how to counter the other side of tyranny and evil that will be on Mars. It will be on the moon. It will be on the first spaceship to Alpha Centauri and so forth. And so we have to know how to handle it. If anyone wants to contact me, of course, you can through SaveManSpace.com, Facebook, and Twitter, and happy to engage anyone in conversation afterwards. So, thank you all very much.